Hello, and welcome to the next episode of Church Technology. And this week will be a fairly short week because I've actually been very busy since our last show last Monday. And just a reminder that we do record this show live every Monday night at 7 p.m. And you can watch all the previous shows by going to the TechZen TV, tech-zen.tv website. Or if you're on YouTube and you want to subscribe via YouTube, we definitely can do that too. It's youtube.com/TechZenTV. All of our shows are out there at TechZenTV. And if you want to connect with us on Facebook, it's facebook.com/TechZenTV. Go out there and click the like button. We definitely appreciate that. And you can get some updates from there as well. And if you want to come and chat with us live, it's 7 p.m. every Monday night at tech-zen.tv/live. And that is 7 p.m. Eastern Time. That would be, what is that, UTC? 11 p.m., I think. UTC, 11 or 12 a.m. maybe. And that is 4 p.m. on the West Coast. All right. Like I said, this week's been kind of busy for me. Lots of things kind of up in the air and going on. But as I mentioned before, I do some consulting with churches, and I want to talk about some of the things that I've been doing this week and talk about soundboards. So my background has been in sound for a long time, since the early 90s. And I do a lot of that, actually, and I really enjoy doing that. But a lot of churches that are just getting in as they grow or they start doing more non-traditional type of music, they tend to have a need for larger soundboards because you bring in a band or a drum kit and a guitarist, and as that contemporary music style grows, you tend to need more inputs. So this week I've been dealing with trying to explain to people the difference between an analog and a digital. And besides the fact that analogs are typically cheaper, although that's not always the case now, there are a bunch of other differences besides cost. So there's always cost issues when it comes to a church because, it's donations and you got to use the money wisely from parishioners, all that stuff. So I understand that. But what I want to try to get across is that now's the time to start looking past analog into the digital realm. And I'm going to give you a couple of different brands of boards and some of the pros and cons, things to look out for, and some of the pitfalls of going digital as well. So typically in most churches, the staff that runs the audio is volunteer. And because of that, you don't want things to be overly complicated because that's typically not what they do for a daily job. Sometimes you get lucky and you get somebody in your church that knows what a soundboard is and really can get around on the soundboard, at least isn't afraid to touch it with something with all these knobs and lights and buttons and screens or whatever. But sometimes you get people that are completely out of their element and are very confused by everything. So here's the thing with analog. It's very straightforward. After you explain to somebody that one row with all the knobs on it is exactly the same as all the other rows, all you got to do is what one row does, you know what they all do. So they're still training about routing. So if you're doing something with an aux send of some kind, you got to explain it's just another output that you can adjust the volume. You got to teach people how to EQ. And actually, I'm going to put a link in the show notes to a place that I've been playing with that somebody sent me a link to that teaches you how to listen to figure out what frequencies are. Or what they sound like, and what so you can hear a 2K frequency versus a 500 hertz frequency. But train your ear to learn how those signals or the sounds sound like. I'm going to put a link to that in the show notes. It's actually a very good resource. But most people come in and they don't understand. They don't know where to find that frequency that they're hearing. Something doesn't sound right. Sometimes they come in and they don't know how to mix a band so that they're not all on top of each other. Things like that. So you come into the analog world and it seems like ultimately it'd be simpler. However, people look at all those knobs. So if you're running, for example, we were running for a long time an ML5000, which is a 60 channel board, has 16 aux sends on it. And this is an analog board, a 4-band EQ, 3 of them sweepable. So it was a really big board. People come in and they see, and I once counted, and it was well over 1,000 knobs on the thing, and that scares people. So going digital is scary from the fact there's less knobs, and it's harder to find things, but it's digital because there's lots of lights on it and things like that, and a little bit more confusing to get around. However, if you're just coming in to operate it, a digital board has some advantages, and we're going to talk about some of those advantages and some of the disadvantages as well, and as well as advantages to analog versus and disadvantages to analog. One of the biggest disadvantages to analog, especially if you have multiple people coming in to run the same system, is they all going to run it differently. They're going to make a change. The next person comes in behind them, and then it's going to be changed, and it's not going to be the same as last time they left, and they could potentially not be able to figure out where the issue is. Where with digital, you can set up a program that says it's recalled to this every Sunday. When you start, this is a process you go through. You go in and you recall it, and it comes back to a known state. So that also allows somebody to come in and set it up properly, that knows what they're doing, and then people that are less familiar with what they're doing, but can operate it fine, can come in and still run the service, but don't have to worry about doing the EQs because somebody ahead of them did the EQs for them. And that's typically the biggest thing, is the EQing. People have a hard time hearing or don't understand what they're hearing and how to fix it. That's where I tend to see the most of the problems. So analog, it's fixed. If somebody makes a change to a knob, it stays that way. If you come in and you bring somebody and he gets it all set up and it's sounding awesome, and then one of the volunteers comes in or somebody else comes in and starts twisting the knobs, it'll never come back to the same way unless you took a picture of it and put everything back to exactly the way that it was, which is not a bad option. If you do have an analog board and somebody's coming in and set it properly, do take pictures of it, because that's typically before digital. That's how most sound guys did it when they had multiple bands, especially, is they would EQ in and mix in a band, and then they would take pictures of it all. And then when they were changing out bands, they'd be going through knob by knob and putting it back. That definitely is except that now it's not Polaroid, it could be a cell phone or whatever. But still not a bad option if you are limited to that. So it used to be the digital boards were way expensive, but now there's a lot of, I don't want to call them low-end boards, because these boards, although they're not that expensive, are definitely not low-end. So we're going to talk about some of those here. But before I go too far, one of the other biggest differences between a digital and an analog board is the gain. In an analog board, you can typically clip, and you don't get a lot of distortion. But on a digital board, when you go clipping or above, you get basically it's all ones. There is nothing above 0. When you go above 0, there is nothing. It's just noise. So there is no such thing as going above, like in the analog world. So you should probably mix things to a lower level so you're never hitting the clip. So, but one of the things in digital boards, most digital boards will have on each channel also compression and gating. So with an analog board, that's all outboard gear. So it's geared that's off to the side somewhere. It goes through an insert or some other method, and it basically is in line, but it requires you to have all this rack of other gear, and most people don't have that. So the reason I bring that up is you can use that to your advantage in the case where you want to mix on a lower level. So, excuse me, you gain that when you go to the digital world. So by going digital, you're gaining a lot of other advantages as far as control goes versus just a blank analog board. So you have to decide how many inputs are needed. Now, I'm referring to churches that typically have more than just a podium mic, maybe 1 or 2 handheld mics, maybe 2 choir mics, the piano, that's right there, 8. So you can get really small boards to do up to 8. But I'm thinking of churches that are at the point where they need to grow past that. Like you're starting to get into contemporary music, or maybe one of your services is contemporary music, and you now have added a drum kit. So I'll tell you, when I do drums, I typically have 12 to 13 channels on a drum kit. Now that's not probably normal for most churches, but we double or triple mic the snare, we double mic the kick drum. Every tom has something on it, 2 overhead mics and a hat. So add all that stuff up. If you got a kit with 4 or 5 drums on the rack, you've gone up to 11, 12, 13 mic inputs. Sometimes just one or two overheads is enough, especially for a smaller church, to do that. So you got to figure out where you want to go with that. Our guitarists are always mic'd in stereo, and keyboards are all in stereo. So you start adding up all those channels, it adds up really, really quick. We typically run 64 channels or so a week. Not typical church, as I know, But if you're starting to get to the point where you're growing, you need to figure out where you're growing to and what's in the budget as far as what size board. So I'm going to tell you that probably one of the better boards that I've seen for this, and it's a fairly recent release, and don't cringe when I say the name, it's Behringer. It's our X32 line. Behringer bought, or is, I don't know if they bought or maybe it was the other way around. I'm pretty sure Behringer bought though. Midas. And if you are familiar with large soundboards, Midas is like the console to use for most big touring bands because they're really well known, and their head amps, the preamp, like where the gain is very warm, and they sound really good, and they're well known for their sound. This board is 32 inputs of Midas head amps. So it's a very nice board. It's actually rather inexpensive. It's probably in the $2,300-$2,400 range to pick one up. It's a 32 channel input board. And the thing is, every channel has all the features on it. It has gates and compression. It has 4-band EQ. Plus it has a low cut adjustment on every channel. So you don't need to buy any external gear to do any of this stuff. It's all in this one box. Now there's a bunch of other boards out there. There's iLive. There's Yamaha makes an 01V. It's an 01V96. That's only 16 channels natively, but can be expanded to 32. So there's a bunch of other digital boards, and these are all in like the couple $1,000 range, like $2,000, $2,300 in that range. There's also a PreSonus board, the Studio Live. However, I would be cautious about that board. It doesn't work the same way that most soundboards work. So if you bring in somebody who's familiar with a soundboard, they are going to be a little confused by it at first because it doesn't work exactly like most soundboards do. It works great. It's a great board. However, it's just a little different. So if you're trying to bring somebody in who kind of knows a little bit about this, you want to stick something probably outside of the PreSonus. Not that it's a bad board. It's a good company. It's a good board. It sounds good. It just functions in a little bit different format than what most people are used to. It's very confusing if you bring somebody in from the outside who hasn't used one before to get used to it. But so we're talking $2,000. We're talking about some of these soundboards that are analog are $1,200, but you get so much more with a digital board. Plus, I can't speak for all these boards, but I know some of them, particularly the X32, allows you to record the whole board, every channel. You have 32 channels via FireWire into a laptop or a computer, and you can play it back to train people. So what you do is you record one of your services, and then when you bring somebody in to train them, you basically play it back through the board, and it sounds just like the band or whoever is still there, and you can train people. So people you're trying to train, it's like they're doing it live with the real instruments and everything, and they can learn. So there's some really cool things you can do with that kind of stuff too. So there's a lot of things going forward. So I'm basically trying to say is at this point you want to look past the analog world and go into digital. The cost of going digital is not much more, if more at all. And if you consider the fact that if you had to buy the analog board and you had to do inserts for everything for gates and compression, then it's much cheaper to go to the digital board. There's a lot less knobs on digital board, and most digital boards will all let you save scenes and settings. So like you can save a particular layout, and then you can also save each individual singer or instrument in a library. So if you change people in and out a lot, like we do, one player comes in this week, you go to the channel that they're on, and you go in the library and you say that's who it is this week, and it brings back the EQs and the gates and compressors and everything as they had set up before, which allows somebody to go in and make all this the pre-setup done, and then a volunteer can come in and just go down the line and say that's who this is today, that's who this is today, and they load up everything, and then they got a really close mix starting out to get a lot more accurate. It makes everything a lot more consistent in the long run. It's much easier than going and looking at pictures and turning knobs and all that stuff to get it back correct. Now, some boards, depending on which board it is, allow you to protect that as well. Some boards allow you to save it off. The X32 in particular, which I use a lot, allows you to save all that to a thumb drive. So the person who's in charge of the ministry would back it up after it's set up and would just keep the thumb drive with them. And if anything ever happened, like somebody overwrote it for any reason, they just bring the thumb drive back in and it comes right back up again. It's a great way of doing it. Plus, if a board would ever die, you can just get the new board in and put the thumb drive in, and bam, you're back up and running in no time at all. So it's very, very nice. Some of these boards also have remote snakes. So if you're in an older church and it's hard to run all these wires back to where this thing is, if you could just run one Cat5 from the soundboard to the stage, you put a box called a stage box up on the stage, everything plugs into it, and that one Cat5 can be your remote snake. And the remote snake's an example on an X32. You can do, I think it's each box or each channel, there's two of them, two digital snakes, and it's 32 back and 64 down. So 64 inputs and 32 outputs can go down that one Cat5. So using both of those channels, you can double that with 64 and 128, which is much more than most churches would ever need. But that also makes the wiring very, very easy. No big snake to run through. Simple Cat5 will do the trick for you. So it's another thing to consider going digital as well. So I'm not going to try to sell you on digital, but I'm just thinking now's the time. With the technology that's coming out, it's just easier to go to digital at this point. You get a lot more bang for your buck. So this week I've been trying to explain all this to some people, and they understand. It just took a little bit to. They're not technology people, which is very, very typical in most churches. So that's where they call in people like us to come in and try to explain it to them and try to put it in terms of money and bang for the buck, as well as usability and trainability. Because the particular people work with this week, they do have somebody who can run the sound, but they have to be like kind of set up for them, and that's what we'll do for them. But I was brought up a great question of why should I go digital if the analog boards are cheaper this week? And that's one to kind of try to cover that. So I didn't really have much else prepared for this week. However, I do have something I'm going to plan for next week. I have another show, and it's called New Media Tech. And a little while ago, I did an episode on microphones. So this is another thing I was going over today about different types of microphones and what's best for using where and things like that. So what I want to do is next week I'm going to do a show, but I'm going to also insert the microphone segment from that previous show into this show. There's no reason for me to re-record it again because it was good the way that it was, where I go over different types of microphones, a little bit of a more focus probably on broadcast, but the polar patterns and all that stuff are the same, and you'll get a good understanding of the different types of microphones and where they can be used as well. So that's what we're going to plan on doing for next week. And I have that. I have to go edit that off so I can play it for next week, but that should be good to go for that. And any other questions you have about you want us to cover, any subject you want us to cover, please let us know. Just send email to churchtechnology@tech-zen.tv, and we'll be sure to cover it. Any questions or whatever. Again, we do this show live every week on Monday nights at 7 p.m. We'd love for you to come and chat. But if you can't, just send us an email, and we'll make sure we include it in the show. Your input is probably the best way to guide us where we should be going with answering people's questions. We have a lot of stuff we can cover. We covered streaming last week. We can cover all kinds of IT. IT or the software used to run a church. Actually, I can cover that in pretty great detail, as well as the networking and the IT infrastructure. And we also want to talk about some video switching, which kind of combines a couple of other shows together. But we have a pretty broad knowledge base when it comes to that kind of stuff. Again, if you're on Facebook, we'd love for you to follow us at facebook.com/TechZenTV. And we post up new videos when they come out up there as well. And if you want to get more involved in an actual talking community between other people, if you go to tech-zen.tv and click on the community, it's actually a Google Plus group. But Google Plus groups are much nicer than what the Facebook groups are. So we created over there. It allows us to do a lot more structure and monitoring and things like that as well. And again, if you are on YouTube, we'd love for you to go to youtube.com/TechZenTV and hit the subscribe button there. It just helps us keep track of how many people are actually watching. And we do have that channel separated out into what's called a playlist. And you can watch just the shows you're interested in. So if this is the only show you watch of ours, you can go out there and click on and subscribe to that particular playlist. And if you're downloading us via podcast, like iTunes or Dogcatcher or any of the other podcast directories where we're located, we definitely would appreciate if you go out and give us a rating, because that definitely helps us get the word out a little more. And this is a show we want to get the word out as much as we can, because we want to help churches to grow. And I think technology good or bad, is playing a big role, especially with getting people that are seeking. Young people that are seeking are in the technology, and if you can reach them through social media or through kind of video presentation or audio or whatever it is, we want to help you be able to build that function of your church up, because that makes you more relevant to them and helps you find the ones who are actually doing the seeking. All right, that's it for church technology this week. We'll see you next Monday at 7 p.m. For show notes for this show, contacts, and more, go to the techzen.tv website, where you can get show notes for all of our shows. We love to hear from our viewers and listeners. We have an email, a Twitter, and a phone number where you can contact us for each show. For details, visit the techzen.tv website and get the show details. You can also make a video and upload it somewhere like YouTube or Vimeo, and then just send us a link. You never know, you may see your video in a future show. You can get all of our shows delivered automatically to your favorite device by going to your favorite podcast website like iTunes and subscribing. Each of our shows also has a YouTube channel you can subscribe to get regular updates. Our shows are also available on most internet radio networks like Stitcher and TuneIn Radio. You can also watch and listen to our shows on Xbox, TiVo, and Roku. You can even find us on your Zune.